All right, so if you're watching this video, it's because you missed the day that we started Unit 3. So make sure, I'm sure we had a map quiz. You get all caught up as soon as possible because we're going to start learning new stuff. But anyways, the Unit 3 is, it covers pretty much, the meat of it is the age of exploration. Um, the different explorers and all that. But before we get into that, we're also going to cover the scientific revolution because the scientific revolution kind of enables and promotes exploration because people understand more about the world around them. But before we get into exploration, I think it's doing the rest of the world a disservice if we just talk about Europe. And so this lecture is going to be Asia in 1500. Asia in the age of exploration. The reason that the Europeans are exploring is because they don't have all of the goods they want. The people who have a lot are the Asians. The people who are the most powerful and cohesive empires and largest empires are the Asian empires at this time period, not the Europeans. That's why they go out and they try to get more land, to get more stuff, because they're not the most powerful. And the ones who are the most powerful, the ones in Asia, are kind of putting the Europeans on a back foot, making them demanding that the Europeans, pretty much worship at their feet if they open their trade and things like that. So anyways, before we get to talking about the Europeans, I do want to talk about Asia in 1500. So that's the title of this lecture. So we're going to learn about 4 different Asian empires at this time period. So let's first talk about the Ottoman Empire. So this is Italy, this is the Mediterranean, this is the Ottoman Empire. This is what you guys learned about last year as being called Asia Minor, right? So this is still southeastern Europe. Asia is going to be all the way over here, really. This is Asia. Let me go back to that map. Okay, so this is Europe, this is Africa. Kind of where I'm putting my mouse right here. Everything to the left is Europe. Everything to the right is considered Asia. Just, for future reference. All right, so the Ottoman Empire was huge. This is where it began, but it slowly spreads into southeastern Europe. Over here, this is called what we call the Balkan Peninsula. It spreads to northern Africa, and it spreads to the Middle East. Bigger than, if we go to this, see all the yellow? And yeah, that's a pretty big empire, way bigger than Spain, way bigger than Italy or France. It's huge. So the more people that these Ottomans conquer, it's hard to create an empire so large. And so what the Ottomans are going to do in order to stay so powerful is they're going to unify their empire through the religion of Islam. Remember, the Middle East is right over here, so it makes sense that they are Muslim, right? And religion is a very unifying force. It makes it so that people over here and people in Northern Africa have something in common with one another, and it unifies their moral compass, their moral code, and their traditions, such as praying 5 times a day, facing Mecca. It culturally unifies people, and so it helps the Ottomans stay in power over such a large territory. However, because it is so many areas, and it is so large, of course you're going to have people who practice a different religion. And usually, for at least the Europeans, which we just learned about, the Protestants really threatened these Catholic kings' power, and the Catholic kings are like, no, in order to stay in power, you all must practice Catholicism. And the result of that was war. Protestants are saying, no, I want to practice my form of Christianity over here in Europe. Well, one of the things that the Asian empires did is that they allowed other religions, they tolerated them within the empire. Because they allowed them to practice their religion as long as they paid a tax. So you might want to add that. You had to pay a tax in order to practice your own religion if it's not Islam. That way you can still control people through money, but you don't go to war. You're not constantly putting out little fires, little religious wars all over your empire, which is very large. So that's one of the reasons the Ottoman Empire was so strong. So let me just look at this real quick. This map again. I know I'm going back and forth. So the Ottoman Empire is kind of surrounding and wrapping itself around the Mediterranean. How did Italy become super wealthy during the Italian Renaissance, right around this time period? Because of the trade with the Muslims. When I'm talking about Muslims, I'm talking about the Ottoman Turks, right, in this area of the world. Because of their geographical advantage, all of the trade coming from the Silk Road is going through here. It's an extremely large and extremely wealthy and powerful empire, way more powerful than any of those in Europe at this time period. Because of, one of the reasons is because of their geography. They got all that trade, all that wealth. They also have weapons, of course. They invent the musket and the cannon, and let's see. This is one of the few ways that they are able to expand their territory. Their weaponry is better than those around them. You know, what were people using before muskets and cannons? Look at this picture. They were using arrows. So just imagine an arrow versus a cannon, right? The Ottomans were very successful in using gunpowder with their muskets and their cannons. And replacing their archers on horseback, is what they used to look like, with musket-carrying foot soldiers. And so what made these weapons much different is that they were, especially cannons, they were, a cannon you can shoot from far away, right? They're extremely offensive, right? Meaning going on the attack. And so the Ottomans, this is one way that they are expanding so far and wide, is because they are using powerful offensive weapons. They're going to, you know, break down walled cities and take them over pretty easily. And you guys learn about the city of Constantinople. I'll show you where it is in a second. That was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. But by the 1300s, the Byzantine Empire was getting much smaller and much weaker. You know, it's getting attacked by the Mongols, and it's I know, of course, it starts to get attacked by the Turks in this area, and ultimately, Constantinople is going to be defeated by the Ottomans, and the Ottoman Empire is going to take control of this very strategic city, and it's going to become the capital of the Ottoman Empire. Except it's going to change its name. It's going to be called Istanbul. So Constantinople is now called Istanbul. The reason, if you guys can remember why it was so important from last year, so the Istanbul is right here. It's got water on all sides of it, right? And so the reason it is such a powerful city is because you can see invaders coming from miles away, right? You can't sneak up on them. Okay. And it's in the Middle East, which is the middle of all that trade. Perfect. Their specialties, I mean, they're growing wealthy because they're trading lots of things with the Asians and with the Europeans, but they specialized in trading coffee and ceramics. So I had a very good friend in college. He was from this area of the world. I'll show you in a second. Let me go back. He was in this area of the world, which was once, you know, part of the Ottoman Empire. He was from, where was he from? Yugoslavia. That's where it was. And he was all about coffee, all about his coffee. You know, he would say, when people knock on your door, you invite them in for coffee. After you eat dinner, you drink some more coffee. Lots of coffee in that area of the world. And ceramics. Do you guys know what a ceramic is? A ceramic is a piece of clay, essentially, that you kind of paint, and then you put it in a kiln, and you can make them very beautiful. And those were the specialties of the specialties that the Ottoman Empire traded. And you have to know that C goes with C, coffee and ceramics. So all this is showing you is just to show you how much it expanded. So this is Rome, Italy, over here. This is the Mediterranean. This is how big it got to be. By the time we get to World War I, which isn't until the spring, the Ottoman Empire is still existing, except it is very, very small and very weak. And they take the wrong side, and they end up being destroyed after World War I. But anyways, make sure you know Southwest Asia. So north, south, west, east. So southwest, north, south, west, east. So over here, most of Asia is over here. This is what we call Southwest Asia. It also expands. This is Anatolia, if you remember that from last year. It also expands to the southeastern Europe and the Balkan Peninsula. So this is where my friend is from. He was from Yugoslavia. It's actually not on this map right now, but this area of the world. And North Africa. So it was a huge empire. Look at all that territory. It almost looks like it was like 3 or 4 countries in Europe, right? Huge empire. Unified by the Islamic religion. Mostly it was Muslims. But in order to prevent some, religious wars, they did religiously tolerate other religions. You just had to pay a tax. Okay. Let's talk about the Mughal Empire. So, this is what subcontinent? This is India. And up here, so it started in the north, but it eventually spread into the south. And so like the whole green, all of that is considered the Mughal Empire. The Mughals descended from the Mongols, which came from like northern Asia. And the Mughal Empire during the 1500s was extremely strong and had so many raw materials that the Europeans wanted. And it spread Islam into India. What religion was India practicing before Islam came? Hinduism and a little bit of Buddhism over here. But now it was the Mongols or the Mughals that conquered and brought and spread in Islam. What they also had in common is that they were religiously tolerant. So make sure you add that, religiously tolerant. In order to unify a land of more than 100 million, which is more people than all of Europe, you kind of have to be religiously tolerant in order to unify all of those people, because not everyone's going to be Muslim. Conquest conquered northern India and eventually spread Islam everywhere. One of the most famous rulers and you don't have to know his name, I'm not going to test you on him. His name was Akbar of the Mughal Empire. And he really promoted his religious tolerance. And you can just see that because he married, amongst others, 2 Hindus, a Christian, and a Muslim. And he allowed his wives to practice their own religious rituals in the palace. And he even he even abolished, meaning got rid of, the tax on Hindu pilgrims, or a tax on non-Muslims. And under Akbar, he just kept conquering more and more territory, and he unified over 100 million people. But it started in northern India. Okay. Because so many people, belonged to this empire, we start to see a very big mixture of cultures. And some of the biggest contributions during the Mughal Empire is that they spread Islam throughout India and its architecture. So this is the Taj Mahal. This is very famous. You'll see this If you ever traveled to India, probably. One of the rulers in the 1600s, he was pretty powerful. We don't have to know who he is, though. He really promoted his love for his wife, and he built the Taj Mahal. It took about 22 years to build. And the Taj Mahal, this building, is actually a tomb. It's where his former wife was laid to rest. She died at around age 38, giving birth to her 14th child. And the goal of creating this piece of architecture was to make a building as beautiful as she was. Yeah, some 20,000 workers labored on it for 22 years. I mean, that is a long time, but it really is a wonder of the world. It's made out of marble. It kind of looks like lace because of how slender some of the towers are. It still exists today, and you can go visit it. It's very gorgeous. The throne has a canopy that even displays a figure of a peacock with a million blue sapphires. And India, which, we're about to talk about India a lot soon because of what the Europeans wanted from India. The Indians had, lots of cotton and tea. And this is not just like any kind of cotton that you can get anywhere else. This is Indian cotton. And of course, all of their teas and gems and spices. And all of the Europeans, they know where India is because they've gotten stuff from there before. These land masses do connect. But it gets to be so expensive that they start to go around Africa to get to India, to bypass all of the Ottomans because they're Christians and they don't want to give so much money to the Ottomans who are Muslims and all that good stuff. So, not good stuff, bad stuff. But anyways, they set up trading posts. What the Europeans do is they set up trading posts on the coast of India. So a post is on the coast. Remember that. They don't infiltrate. This is not a time period where they're coming in and colonizing India yet, although they will. They will do that, just not quite at this time period. And we'll talk a little bit. A post is where they just kind of leave some Europeans to stay there to trade. So then the Europeans, when they come back, they can continue to kind of trade with those people at those specific places. And they're specifically looking for the cotton and tea. And it's so competitive that we're going to see, the Dutch East India Company and the Portugal East India Company and the British East India. They're going to set up entire companies, which we'll talk about later, to trade and make a profit on all these goods that they can get from India. And as a result, with all of this trade with India and the Europeans, we're going to see the British trade so much, really want their cotton textiles. And cotton textile manufacturing, we talk about how Britain becomes an industrialized country first. The first thing that they are going to industrialize is textiles. Textiles are fabrics. But in southern India, they also are going to set up some trade and get some silk, spices, and gems. All right, China. China's all the way over here. So India is kind of like underneath where this thing is right here. We should know where China is. And China was another empire during the 1500s that was perhaps so much bigger and so much more powerful than any of these European countries at the time. And the European merchants did not really have anything that the Chinese wanted. The Chinese were very self-sufficient, meaning they didn't need anything that the Europeans were selling. They could survive on everything that they already had. And when the European merchants would come and trade with the Chinese, they pretty much had to worship at the emperor's feet. That was the imperial policy. The Europeans had to bring gifts to pay tribute to the Chinese emperors in a way that would acknowledge their submission to China. And they would not allow these outsiders to come in and threaten their peace and their prosperity. So what we're going to see is we're going to see the Chinese very much limit the foreign trade with the Europeans. So what would happen is the Europeans, they would come on their boats, beg, essentially, kiss the emperor's feet, give them gifts in order to be able to trade with the Chinese. So one way that they did that is they only had 3 trading ports. So if you were a European, you couldn't just come and just start trading with people. You had to go to 3 specific ports, and you could only trade there. 3 is not very many for how big this country is. Let's see. And when the Europeans came and they stayed in things called enclaves. So an enclave is a place where foreigners were restricted to certain areas. If they were going to come, the Europeans weren't going to come and mix with the Chinese people and try to spread their Christianity. No, they were going to come and they had to stay there. They were not allowed to interact with the Chinese people at large. The Chinese government did not want that to happen. The Chinese government is what we would call very isolationist. You should probably write that down. Isolationist. Yeah, because sometimes the Europeans would bring their Christian missionaries. They did not want that. But they did bring some of their European inventions, like the clock and the prism. But overall, what the Chinese sorry, not the Chinese, what the Europeans really wanted was the Chinese silk and porcelain. The same goods that they had been wanting for a long time, they were getting via the Silk Roads, but now eventually they're going to come to the coast and by boat. To bypass the Ottoman Muslims. So this is an example of the Chinese porcelain. Very beautiful, very beautiful. The Europeans didn't have anything quite so beautiful as the Chinese. As the Chinese goods. The Britons going to actually find that very irksome eventually, and later we're going to see the British sell the Chinese opium. And opium is very addictive. It is what is, the basis of a lot of our painkillers. And eventually, in order to get the Chinese to willingly and openly trade with the Europeans, they're essentially just going to get the Chinese addicted to these very addictive drugs. They're going to drug them. But that's not for a while. At this point in time, the Asian empires are the strongest, much stronger economically, politically, militaristically a bit than the Europeans in the 1500s. All right, and the last area we're going to talk about is Japan. Japan is right here. Let's see if we can find a bigger picture of Japan. Nope, let me go back real quick. So, you see, this is China. Japan isn't even on this map barely. It's over here. It's the island. So Japan is even more isolated than the Chinese. Even more isolated. Instead of having 3 ports, they only have 1 trading port. And during the Middle Ages, let me come back to this real quick. During the Middle Ages, we all think the Middle Ages was only a time period in Europe, but the Middle Ages also, spread to other areas of the world. And so in Japan, it was essentially, this is where we see the samurai. This is where we see very local rulers taking control and fighting amongst themselves. And Japan, for a very long time during the Middle Ages, was not unified under one government. It was just a bunch of different warlords essentially fighting amongst themselves. It was a kind of Japanese feudalism. But anyways, eventually one of the warlords is going to unify Japan and successfully unify everyone under him and take control. And he, is a military ruler. and he's just going to keep them from rebelling, keep the other warlords from rebelling, by essentially making them come and live at the palace every other year to keep an eye on them. But anyways, that's what is called a shogunate, that form of government where the ruler is essentially a military ruler, and all of the other military local rulers have to bend to his will. And if they don't, then the military leader is going to put you down. Eventually, we're going to see, there would be an emperor sometimes, but the emperor a little bit later won't actually have any power. The real power will be in the military in Japan. And that's an important thing to start to think about, is that aspect of the Japanese culture. By the time we get to World War II, that militarism is still in their culture. But anyways, that's very far away. When the Europeans did come to trade with the Japanese, they, of course, started to bring their Christian missionaries. And the shogun did not like that, because the Christian missionaries would come in and essentially try to replace a lot of the traditional Japanese beliefs and traditions with Christian traditions. And so what we're going to see is that kind of government completely reject Christianity, and he's going to actually specifically focus on ridding the country of all Christians in the 1600s. And so we're going to see Christianity extremely repressed. We're going to see the Japanese not want the Europeans to mess with their culture. They have, lots of style in their art, in their drama, in their literature. And, they're writing poetry, they're reading haikus, they're expressing images. That's what a haiku is. It's poetry, which does not express an idea, but an image, which you'll learn about in English class a little bit. And so they really value, and they think their culture is so beautiful, and they don't want the Europeans coming and messing with it and changing it. But, okay. Okay, so after, that's it. That's all that goes with this. But to keep in mind, actually, real quick, to keep in mind what that goes with Japan is, actually, no, I'll mention that later. Never mind, sorry. So what I want you guys to think about is, what are the similarities, write it down, what are the similarities between the Mughal Empire and the Ottoman Empire? And what are the similarities between the Chinese Empire and the Japanese Empire? If you look through your notes, I did not say it explicitly during this lecture, but you need to be able to answer that by the time you get back to class. All right? Check to see if there's any classwork or homework, and see you soon. Thank you so much for watching.